Today I wanted to talk about Wicked, the movie that just came out. And this is a movie that is based on a musical that is based on a book by Gregory Maguire. And there it is. And then this book is based on... actually, you know what? This book is probably based on this movie that came out in 1939, when the movie is a film adaptation of the original book by L. Frank Baum. I believe his name is Lyman Frank Baum, but I guess he calls himself L. Frank Baum. Now this, so now that I've explained that, I wanted to talk about how some people have been suggesting that, the Wicked movie, like it's kind of like a sequel or a prequel, a continuation, or that it somehow is connected to this world. Now, in my view, I think that's the wrong way of looking at it, because, the books, whenever two different people have made something, it's not possible. I don't think you can connect them, even though you might try to. It's anachronistic. Anachronistic means that it's out of place. It's out of place in time. It's out of place. A book that was written 100 years ago, more than 100 years ago, is not really connected to what's happening right now. And I don't think it's fair for an author, let's say, if you write something, the way that you write something is always going to be different than anyone else could ever write it. And so, in that sense, any future adaptations, okay, so an adaptation is basically when they retell a story. If I were to take someone else's characters and tell my own, kind of like a fan fiction, it's not the same. It'll never be the same, right? It'll always have my views of the world and my interpretation and the way that the original story was created is not the same as how is only contained within the author, the original author or creator. And so that's the problem. That's the difference. And so that's why I don't, whenever you have an adaptation, I think it's important to understand, it can be a great movie. It could be the best movie ever, but it's not really related to the original story. And so that's basically what I wanted to sort of talk about. This idea that, sometimes, with, especially nowadays with movies, right? There are so many remakes, so many, in music, but at this time we're talking about movies, and there's Cynthia Erivo. There are so many remakes, and sometimes that can confuse. It's almost like everything kind of just blends together. So the past blends with the future or the present, I should say, what's happening now, and somehow it's connected, and we're supposed to watch this and then watch, the 1939 movie, and I think it's important to distinguish. I think it's important to celebrate, obviously, I believe in adaptations, right? As long as, as much as people can sort of appreciate the original work, right? And as a way of introducing people to new ideas. But I also think that it's important to kind of have a sense of history, of understanding where things come from and how and what things are, because otherwise you might confuse yourself. You might just end up confusing the story, and you might not realize why some things don't make sense or some things don't work together. And it kind of blends with reality. It just blends in a way that I feel that if you understand the history, and if you understand that, it's just an adaptation, it's just someone else's view on the world, then all of a sudden it's different. All of a sudden you don't have to worry about continuity problems. You don't have to worry about, and it also allows you to appreciate the original work, I think, as a standalone art, if you truly wanted to see what the inspiration is and how things come to be. Now, the other thing I wanted to say is that, Gregory Maguire, obviously, there are some benefits to doing adaptations, and there are some downsides, right? So the benefit is that you have certain ideas that are kind of ready-made, and it's kind of like making, cooking something, and you have all the ingredients set up, and it's like a kit, basically, a ready to cook kit, and all you have to do is just put it all together and cook it, and then you have something cooked. And that's sometimes, that makes sense, right? Sometimes I think an adaptation is something that is useful if there are certain ideals and principles that you feel could be said or could be used in creative ways that expand on the story or that go in a different direction. And so for me, and I personally, I think Wicked, it's a pretty interesting adaptation, obviously, because it just enhances it, the social and I don't want to spoil it, but basically, it enhances the world in a different way, but it's not. But when I think of it, I always see it as this is a Gregory Maguire sort of world, if that makes sense. Now, of course, they're using the Wizard of Oz as a setting, and so it's not really, obviously it's always going to be L. Baum's world, so maybe we should do that, but it's an adaptation. It's a different sort of view by Gregory Maguire, so it's a different, I guess what I'm saying, we should always give credit to the original ideas, and I guess what I'm saying is that if you think about it, a lot of times the reason why people adapt, is the adaptation even necessary, right? Because Gregory Maguire could have made an original story, and it would have worked just as well, in my opinion. Do you know what I mean? He could have made the witch not a witch. It could have just been a sorceress, and instead of being green-skinned, maybe she has blue skin. And maybe she wears all white, or do you know what I mean? Like the story could have been completely different, and it would have still worked, actually. And in some ways, Gregory Maguire probably could have even created his own world. So just to show you the possibility. And so, so that I say that because I don't want you to think that it's not necessarily bad to make adaptations, but I think it sometimes limits. I don't know. But maybe Gregory Maguire didn't want to make, an original story like that. I don't know. Like it just gets me to think about how adaptations work and how, another example would be like in Lord of the Rings, right? Where Peter Jackson, right? He created the movies. They're so, they have a certain look to them that is very specific, that is different from J.R.R. Tolkien. So it almost becomes its own thing, but it's still, the original writer always still, in this case, L. Frank Baum, always has sort of a, obviously the world, we're celebrating the world of the original creator. The other thing, I guess the last thing I wanted to say is that, the ability to use a world and how it can inspire things. I always find it interesting that that a world can connect, and that it can connect you and create sort of ideas and emotions in you. And so I do believe, if you hear me say this, you might think that I'm generally not a fan of sort of adaptation, or I wouldn't say I'm not a fan of adaptations. I'm not a fan of like remakes, I guess is what I'm saying. But that being said, I do think that it's possible to do a remake or an adaptation that is right. Because after all, taking a book and adapting it to a film, that in and of itself is an art, right? And so I believe that it is possible to create beautiful, like a great story that's based on another story. And the only thing that I would say, though, is that if you are going to do that, or if any film studio is going to do that or whatever, that it be original enough, that it has enough that it's worth making, if that makes sense. That you add enough to it that it's different, so people know that it's not the exact same, but also that you at least contribute something, add something to it that's different, right? Add something to it. And I believe that this film, I don't want to spoil it, but they added, right, by having it be a musical. It's a weird, kind of a weird twist of how this film was made, or this, I should say, this perhaps, what would you call it? This franchise at this point, the Wicked franchise. It started off as a musical, and that affects how the movie is. And so it's interesting. It just adds a twist to it that it adds a twist to it that, and I think the Broadway medium itself is different from the film. And so I like that is a part of the film as well. And so it turns it into something else. So all of a sudden it's not like, it's something different. And so for that reason, like I said, I do like adaptations. It's possible to make good adaptations, is what I'm saying. Everything doesn't have to be made from scratch. Although I have a preference for it, obviously I'm going to give it precedence. But when you do have a good adaptation, it's possible. It's possible to retell a story, especially if you feel, and as an artist, I would say this, especially if you feel like the story hasn't been told, or like there's an angle of the story that you feel has not been properly sort of addressed or has not been properly understood. And so I can see how an adaptation can work to emphasize, when we see like different versions of Peter Pan, right? Like you notice that different Peter Pans, they will emphasize different things. Sometimes they'll emphasize Tink, like Tinkerbell, or sometimes they'll emphasize, Peter Pan's, obsession with Wendy, or sometimes they'll emphasize the Captain Hook's relationship with Wendy, or, and all of these different, depending on what movie you watch, you can see these adaptations and how they interpret the story in different ways. And so even though you can pay respect to the original creator and author, but still create something interesting. And I think that's kind of the right way to go about it. And like I said, I think the audience, it is, I think it behooves the audience to be mindful of that and realize that, hey, you know what, this is an adaptation, but that's okay. It doesn't have to match up to the original book or the original movie. And so when people go and watch, the Wicked film, I do think it's good to have, obviously, some people are not going to know, but I think for the astute observer, it would behoove you to appreciate the art and appreciate the adaptation, so that you can kind of see what's different and what's not, and you can just appreciate it better when you understand something better, if that makes sense. So let's say when you play, let's say, a video game, right? Like you can appreciate a video game if you understand its place in history, as weird as it sounds, right? If you understand like how it came to be, or where it lies in the timeline, where it lies, or who made it. So video games are interesting because video games are also, like how many Mario games have there been, right? There have been so many Mario games, and each one is different. So obviously, there are certain worlds where it's meant to be reused. But when you reuse it, they're all separate, they're all treated like a separate world. And so in this case, when I think of Wicked, I'm going to treat it like a separate world of its own. And so that way, I think I'm able to, to look at it and with as much as understanding as you can give it. But, in the grand scheme of things, though, I know some people would say that, maybe I'm just overthinking it, and maybe I should just, just enjoy the movie. Like, who cares where things come from? But, the historian in me, I guess, or I don't know if, well, I'm not a historian, but, the historical um, interest within me, and the way that I approach art and and art appreciation, I feel like I cannot. I just want to understand things as much as I can, and I want to be fair. There's a certain level of fairness that is within me, and that's why you might think that maybe I'm just overthinking it, but really, I no, I just feel like it enhances my my appreciation of whatever it is that I'm looking at, or whatever it is I'm doing. Even though, and I say that because art is not just, it's important to understand where it comes from and why it was made, or try to understand, I should say, because that's actually open to interpretation, right? A lot of times, it's a matter of debate, it's a matter of discussion. But to me, I think it's relevant. I think it's important to try to understand why things are, why things are the way they are, and that's just my way of approaching life and approaching art. But I know for a lot of people, and in a lot of societies, for example, if that knowledge gets lost, then people won't know where it comes from. And sometimes it can get confused and it gets muddled, and people just start assuming things or not understanding at all why why the art form is the way it is, or why a story is being told. And it just becomes, and then the sense of history gets all mixed up too if you don't keep track of it. You might just start putting things together that are anachronistic. As I said, I said that word. And anachronistic means that it's out of place. So your thinking is going to be out of place if you don't understand. But, I guess a lot of people would say, well, it's just art, like it doesn't matter. But, and, maybe in the grand scheme of things, like nothing matters, right? If you take that approach, I think that, I don't know, I think life will be a little more disorganized, and I think it'll be more truthful and more accurate, I guess, if we approach art, with the same, even though art is not real, right? Like you could say, well, it doesn't matter, just let, copyright doesn't matter, or, well, obviously copyright matters, but I mean, some people would say that, maybe art is just art, and just let it be whatever. But I think it matters that, it matters that you understand context, because it will, I believe it will enhance your art, and it will enhance your understanding of the world, because it's a reflection of you. Because if you approach art, nonchalantly and without thinking, if you approach art unthinkingly, then you're going to approach everything unthinkingly, and nothing matters. And it's just it's a disorganized way of living. And I don't prefer it. I think this is why it's so important to have historians and to have sort of librarians and artisans that can appreciate where things come from, why things are the way they are, and also it's a matter of debate. And so because it's a matter of debate, it's possible that we might not ever, have one, we might not always have an agreement, right, on why something is the way it is. But at the very least, I don't know, I guess it just got me thinking, because, people, obviously the new Wicked movie has come out. And, a lot of people, they're wondering, like, I guess there are discussions on, well, how should we approach it? It's Wizard of Oz, but it's not. And it's kind of, and there have been so many adaptations of Wizard of Oz too. Like, there's so many movies, like probably dozens. Believe it or not, you might think that, like, when this movie came out in 1939, it actually wasn't the first. Like, there were many musicals and silent films that had been made of Wizard of Oz. And so it was, And so it's, the what we see, which, by the way, if you haven't seen this film, it's a great film, The Wizard of Oz. But it's hard for us to think because we think that it just came out of nowhere. Yeah, but actually there were so many adaptations, so many musicals, so many, and when I say musicals, I mean like Broadway back then, in the early 1900s. And there were so many adaptations made before that L. Frank Baum, he had the opportunity to see his work come to life, but he didn't live to see this movie, which is really kind of the pièce de résistance. It's a great film, and I will say it's colorful. The music is great. It's an amazing film, but it's hard to believe. It's like you want to think that it kind of stands on its own, but really there were a lot of iterations that happened, and if it, and perhaps this work is itself an adaptation itself, and it also reflects just how good the writing and the filmmaking, the filmmakers of even people in the 1930s, they had a really good understanding of how to make a good show, and they did it all by hand. Like a lot of it was they had special effects that were by hand, and there's something special about that. If you can appreciate and try to understand why and where things come from, I think, like, to me, it enhances my ability. This is why I love analyzing art. I love art history, and my hope is that maybe you can learn to appreciate something by understanding not only the history but also the components that make up the art. And in this case, in the case of film, in the case of music, obviously you would focus on the notes and the lyrics. But in the case of the film, you would focus on the plot, the way the story is crafted, the decisions that were made, everything all coming together. And every single work of art is unique and represents an effort, a beautiful effort. And so in a way, it's its own thing, and I like that, it celebrates the world of Oz, but it also has, it's just a celebration of what humans can do when we work together to create things. And that's really what film is. Now, as you can see, I'll just use this picture as an example. It looks, obviously there are a lot of digital, everything is just digital. It's just computer. They don't really build, things anymore, but, set pieces and stuff like that. But it's still, I don't know, it looks good though, but it's tricky, I guess. But it looks good. It looks a little hazy to me. I don't know. I'll have to see it. It's always tricky though, but I mean, I guess you could argue that film is all about illusions, and it's always been like that. So maybe, but overall, because it's computer, obviously you can tell that they go out of their way to make things, more intricate and convoluted than it should be. Like these gears right at the front, it looks very, very strange, very overwrought, overdone, but it works because when you have the computer, you can do amazing, you can do crazy and intricate things. In some ways, and now that we have kind of the generative AI art, it tends to overdo things, which I think is good. Well, I think it's good because it's a change of pace from the minimalism that we usually see, which I'm not too much of a fan of. But then also, when you look at this, for example, I mean, it's almost overdone, like they might want to simplify it a little bit, but I don't know. See, as we can see there with the little spires, it looks a little chaotic, but that's just my view. I guess that's just me giving my interpretations of this. But like I said, so anyway, I do think it's interesting to see these these adaptations and seeing that, the Wizard of Oz is still able to continue. It's still able to inspire new generations. And it's not connected to L. Frank Baum directly, but it's obviously inspired by L. Frank Baum. And it's a celebration of humanity. And I hope that people can kind of appreciate the new, or appreciate and adapt things that you think could be adapted, but at the same time, don't be afraid to create something new either. I think we need to do both. A bit of both is good. Some of the greatest works of art, are adaptations, but also, like the Leonardo da Vinci, or they were based on ideas that came thousands of years before them. But then at the same time, when they were painting their paintings and sculptures, but at the same time, there were also, original thoughts, just like L. Frank Baum with Wizard of Oz. And sometimes we need a little bit of both in society. So thank you all for joining me.